Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll start our opening round with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes, please.
Ms. Nicholson, you understand that in your testimony today that it's expected that though you haven't sworn an oath that your answers will be fulsome and truthful?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do.
You sent an email to Minister Jolie's Chief of Staff on June 17th, and you said both CNGNY, HOM. Can you just give those acronyms for us quickly?
Certainly. CNGNY refers to how we refer to the consulate.
And HOM is?
The head of mission.
Right. Both CN, GNY, HOM, and staff have been instrumental throughout this process, with the HOM providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. Did you personally have knowledge of Mr. Clark's personal involvement, or was that relayed to you? And if someone related to you, who was that?
Mr. Chair, as I stated in my opening remarks, my role is to summarize the information that is provided to me at the best available information at that time.
Okay, who provided the information to you?
In gathering the information to convey and respond to the Minister's office, I engaged with the property branch.
Okay, who in the property branch?
Mr. Chair, my interaction was with Robin Dubois, the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Property Branch.
And that's the only person?
Mr. Chair, I also engaged with members of his team, including the Director General for Policy and Planning of the Property Branch.
And that is?
That person is Frank. And apologies to Frank, I won't be able to say his last name correctly, Huzang Ngabe.
On July 24th, this committee passed a sweeping accountability motion on this $9 million condo purchase for a Liberal insider during a cost of living crisis here in Canada. And then the following day, you issued a bogus correction to your June 17th email. And in that correction, you say that neither the head of mission was, and you say PRNMY nor CNGNY was part of the selection or approval process for the overall process for the property purchase. And so just so we're clear, you wrote this email that I'm referring to from July 25th, 2024, and you wrote the email that I previously referenced on June 17th, 2024. Those, I accurately quoted you in both?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I drafted those emails.
Okay. So in the first email, ma'am, you say both CNGNY, HOM, and staff have been instrumental throughout the process, with the HOM providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. That's not a typo. It's not a comma instead of a semicolon. That's very deliberate language. You're the head of mission providing the green light. Who instructed you to issue the correction that you issued on the 25th, the day after the motion was passed by the committee?
Mr. Chair, no one instructed me to make a correction.
Okay, so you'll have to elaborate, ma'am. The timeline is beyond curious. June 17th, you explicitly say the head of mission greenlit the project. July 24th, the committee issues the invitation for Mr. Clark to appear, and the next day, you suddenly your mind is cast back more than a month to issue a correction to the email that you sent, just of your own volition.
Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, the term green light, well, first I think it's important to remember the context in which the first email was drafted.
With all due respect, ma'am, the question was about the genesis of the so-called correction email that you sent. Did you do this entirely of your own undertaking without discussion, consultation, or instruction with anyone?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I work with the best available information provided at the time. After issuing the initial June 15th or 17th email that was, as I mentioned, an initial overview. The Office of the Associate requested the leads to go through and pull together a more detailed chronology of events. And once that information was available, I relayed that information to the Minister's office. No one asked me to correct anything. I relayed the best available information that was presented to me at the time.
Who told you that Mr. Clark was not involved?
Mr. Chair, the records of from the property branch demonstrated that the Consul General was aware of the process, but not involved or in a decision-making role.
Yeah, I've got to tell you that's quite the reversal. You effectively swallowed yourself whole in this correction that you issued within a day of this committee having Mr. Clark ordering him to appear. And I'm just going to quote you back to yourself. The head of mission providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. That was based on the best available information that was provided to you at the time, but the information that you received a month later, a day after this committee passed the motion, is a complete reversal of that. Will you table for this committee all correspondence, written, electronic, or otherwise, related to this issue, and specifically to the July 25th subject matter that you write on?
Mr. Chair, of course, I'm happy to provide
Thank you very much.
Material that would be useful.
Thank you. And our committee has passed a motion. We require any requested documents within 3 weeks, 3 calendar weeks, not business weeks.
Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I'll give you a moment to put your earpiece on.
I don't think that my headpiece is working correctly, and just pour être sûr que je peux comprendre.
Just to be sure that I can understand all of the questions in French, it would be helpful to have someone help me.
We'll just freeze the clock for 15 seconds.
I think we have the same issue with both.
I think it's more you're the issue.
Sorry?
I think
I know.
I should turn.
Donc, nous sommes à...
So we are in Ottawa on this beautiful day. It was foggy this morning.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So my colleagues have already talked about this, and I'm trying to fully understand the statement from the email on June 17th versus July 25th. When you wrote, the head of mission and staff from the mission played an instrumental role throughout the process, what does that mean to you? That they were instrumental, what does that mean as a concrete action? I will answer in English just to be certain that I'm clear.
Sorry, but this still wasn't working very well, so I really didn't hear most of the question, with apologies.
We'll suspend for 30 seconds.
Donc, je vais reposer.
So I will ask my question again. In the email from June 17th, 2024, it was written that the head of mission and staff from the mission played an instrumental role throughout the process, and that the head of mission approved the selection of the new residents. First question, to you, what is it to play an instrumental role concretely in terms of actions? What does that mean? And when you wrote that the head of mission approved the selection of the new residents, greenlit, is that approval a real approval, or is it just an administrative requirement without it really being him who makes the final decision? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. with respect to instrumental, what was meant to be communicated, and as far as the role of the mission staff, what was communicated to me is the mission staff, for example, had been instrumental in assisting with engaging a broker, a realtor on the ground, had accompanied the property team to the 21 different site visits, and had been involved in the process throughout the over, as I said, 10 years. In order to provide a more fulsome response to that question, I would need to refer you to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau, who is more familiar with the processes. But what was communicated to me was that the mission staff had been involved in supporting the staff.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll talk about mission staff again, but the email also refers to the head of mission. So what are the concrete actions that the head of mission took and that show that he played an instrumental role?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, as I stated in my opening remarks, that email should have been drafted more clearly. It should have said and read that the head of mission was aware of the process, and the staff were instrumental. And apologies for the confusion that made. Again, this was a transitory email that was meant as a quick update, a placeholder to the chief of staff in initial response to his question that was focused primarily on understanding the rationale and the business case for the department's decision to sell.
Merci. La seconde.
Thank you. Second question was, the head of mission greenlit the selection of the new residence. Did he actually approve it or greenlight it, or was it just an administrative obligation? And if he didn't greenlight it, what would the consequences have been?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the term green light was meant as a thumbs up. It was just intended to communicate that the Consul General was aware of and prepared to deal with the hassle of moving partway through his assignment, and that he had not raised any concerns with the department's decision to move forward with the selection of the sale. Again, could have been crafted better. At the time, this email was focused primarily on addressing questions about the sale.
Et s'il ne l'avait pas approuvé?
And what would have happened if he hadn't greenlit it? What would the consequences have been?
The department, in order to answer that question, I would need to refer to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau. My limited understanding is that the head of mission is not in a decision-making capacity at any mission.
Parlant de vos notes d'allocution.
Speaking of your opening remarks, usually we ask to receive them in both official languages 48 hours before the meeting. Would it be possible for you to submit them, please, as soon as possible so that we can have them in front of us?
Certainly. My apologies, Mr. Chair. My understanding was that had been done by the department. I believe that I have remarks on hand that I'd be happy to share if that would be helpful.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll ensure the clerk sends them out. Mr. Backrack, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Boy, this is a frustrating bit of testimony and somewhat unbelievable, to be honest. Ms. Nicholson, the things that you're saying are tough to believe because you strike me as someone who is very precise and very professional in your conduct. And what you're claiming is that you accidentally mischaracterize something that seems to be characterized in a very specific way. Does not the term gave the green light, isn't that synonymous with approving something? You've characterized it as okay and willing to go along with a process, but if I say that someone gave me the green light, to me that means that someone approved something. Is that not the most common definition of that phrase?
Mr. Chair, I'm unable to speak to common definitions. I can only speak to my intent and how I intended and what I was intending to convey. And as I said in my opening remarks, that sentence, again, was drafted in the context focused on the sale of the current residence and was intended to communicate that the Consul General was aware of and prepared to accommodate the department's plan to proceed with identifying a replacement property. It was no way in meant, and as I stated in my opening remarks, I did not say that the Consul General was involved in any of the decision-making process. I did not say that he exercised influence or signed for any transactions, and there have been no records found that indicate anything to the contrary. Again, the email drafted on June 17th was an initial email, a quick update, a transaction based on the best available information that we had at the time. As I said, in hindsight, the language could have been drafted more precisely, but again, the context for that email was drafted specifically focused on responding to questions from the Minister's office about the sale. Why was the department taking a decision to sell a property it had purchased in 1961? And our intent and our area of concern and focus was principally and totally focused on communicating the department's business case and rationale for that decision to sell.
Ms. Clark, there's two possible explanations for what happened. One is the explanation you've provided, which is that you accidentally mischaracterized what occurred and used language that you shouldn't have used because it didn't accurately describe what happened. The other explanation is that actually Mr. Clark was involved in the process, did give the green light, tried his best to avoid having any documentation of that, and yet despite trying to avoid documentation, ended up with this email on June 17th, which was then corrected. Like, for a member of the public who's watching this testimony and trying to decide which of those explanations is the most likely, like, you have to forgive people who think that the most likely explanation is the simplest one, which is that actually the language you used in the June 17th email, giving the green light, have been instrumental, was an accurate reflection of his role in the process. Like, how do you explain to reasonable people that are watching this testimony and thinking, it seems like maybe something occurred that shouldn't have occurred?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, a mistake was made. The department proactively provided that clarification to the committee, anticipating that there could be concern, fully cognizant of how language taken out of context could be misinterpreted. And that's why I'm here today to convey and to clarify the context within which that first email was drafted, to clearly state that there was no request by anyone to ask me to make a correction. What the information that was provided on July 25th was pulled together over a process of the property team going through and clearly putting a more detailed explanation together. And that explanation was provided to the Minister's office on July 25th.
I asked Mr. Clark at his previous appearance how he was notified that the process was occurring and whether he could provide documentation of that notification. And he said there was no documentation. It was all done verbally. Is that convenient? Is that appropriate given the context, given the need to document, notification of significant officials like Mr. Clark? Like, it seems unusual that something like notifying the Consul General that a process was taking place wouldn't be documented in some way through an email or a memo or something like that. It seems to kind of play into this pattern that we're seeing, which is that he actually had a more involved role than he said he had, and just none of it was supposed to be documented, because if he was that involved, it wouldn't have been following the department's procedures. Why wasn't it documented when he was notified of the process?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I'm unable to speak to whatever transactions or communications would have taken place on the ground. For that, I would need to refer the committee to my colleagues at work at our mission in New York.
Mr. Chair, do I have more time? 30 seconds. Okay. I'm not sure how much further we can take this testimony other than just to express my total incredulity at the fact that The language used in these professional communications is so specific and seems obvious to many members of the committee that the language was meant to convey Mr. Clark's role and then was retracted. Maybe my last question will be this. If, hypothetically, Mr. Clark had been involved and had given the green light, which constitutes approval of the process, if that had all occurred, as articulated in your June 17th email, would that have been inappropriate?
I'm afraid there's not enough time for a response, but perhaps on your next round or perhaps in writing. We'll now go to our second round. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Nicholson, the Treasury Board just recently increased the approval threshold from $4 million to $10 million, as I'm sure you're aware, in 2022. How many real estate purchases did the Minister of Foreign Affairs approve on an annual basis, both before and after this significant change, please?
Mr. Chair, with apologies, that would be outside of my scope and area of expertise. I would be happy to refer the question to my colleague, Stéphane Cousineau.
That's not necessary at this time. Perhaps if Monsieur Cousineau could provide this information to the committee and table it, that would be truly appreciated. Thank you. Minister Joly was appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs in late 2021, and it seems shortly after this the threshold was then increased by $6 million. And now the minister suddenly is not required to approve of these costly real estate purchases. And yet the following year, Tom Clark is appointed as Consul General of New York, and immediately after this, work is underway to provide him with a new luxury apartment on Billionaires Row. Does this timing not seem a little suspect to you and seem to the point that things perfectly lined up to allow Mr. Clark to have this new luxury apartment?
Mr. Chair, I can really only speak today to my role in this process, which is limited to these two emails that have been presented to the committee. What I can say from my understanding is that this process, I believe, spanned over 10 years, was initiated in 2014, which was 8 years prior to the current head of missions arrival in New York.
According to an ATIP the National Post received, it states that you emailed an executive in the department that the branch in charge of the purchase failed to mention the apartment was on Billionaires Row. I believe this is Monsieur Cousineau's branch. Why did you personally think that it was important for the minister to know that this was located on Billionaires Row? Why did that stand out to you to mention to her?
Mr. Chair, my summary in that email to the Deputy Minister who was acting for the Associate over that weekend was very much to convey the background and all information to ensure that he had the most detailed information to make decisions on the file. What I intended in drafting that email was simply a summary of events that had taken place to that date.
Right. In your introduction, Ms. Nicholson, you indicated that you prioritize issues for the minister. You provide a summary of issues to the minister. What is the title and name of your counterpart with the minister, please?
If I understand correctly, Mr. Chair, if the honourable member is asking for the name of the Chief of Staff in the minister's office?
That's correct, yes. Who do you have these daily conversations with, please?
Oh, with apologies, that was I was speaking to the role of the Associate Deputy Minister. My daily conversations are with the Associate Deputy Minister, who is my boss.
Okay, pardon me, but your counterpart that you have these or bring up points of interest to the minister, who do these occur with?
If I understand correctly, the question, Mr. Chair, in conveying information to the minister's office, that largely goes from our floor to our liaison unit.
I'm going to go to the process then, Ms. Nicholson. What criteria do you personally use to bring something forward to the minister? You said you prioritize issues and you provide summaries. What information, what flags you personally that something has to be brought to the attention of the minister?
Mr. Chair, the majority of the work that I do in summarizing or prioritizing are areas that the leads within the department, the branches, bring forward to my associate and identify as priorities within the department or that might be of interest or of need to update in the minister's office. I have never personally identified a priority for the minister.
Okay. How does the minister then flag decisions that are of importance to her?
Mr. Chair, the minister, and again, my involvement with this is quite limited, my direct involvement, but my understanding of the process is that the minister conveys to her staff what her priorities are, and those come down to our department via the, we call them a liaison unit that works between the minister's office and the deputy's office.
Did the minister's office ask you to send the July 25th correction?
The minister's office, Mr. Chair, did not ask me to send any correction ever.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Pardon. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I'm sorry for the interpreters. Ms. Nicholson, I've listened to you, and I have the impression, I've experienced it before in another life, I have the impression that I'm talking to someone who's covering for someone else, who's covering someone else's mistake, a decision by another person, because it's what needs to be done. In all sincerity, I hope it's not the case. If it is the case, I find it sincerely unfortunate. But I need to ask you the question. Are you covering for someone?
Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the honourable member's concern. This really is a simple matter of a misword or a different choice of a word. If we could go back in time, we would write the email differently, make it more clear. But the information that I've provided to you and all of the testimony that I've given to you is accurate.
Okay. The threshold for the purchase of an official residence was increased in 2019. It's now at $10 million, if I recall correctly. In the past, residences were built, for example, in Peru, it cost $16 million for a chancellery over 10 years ago. And there just needed to be an authorization. Is it Global Affairs that requested to Treasury Board that the threshold be increased so there no longer needed to be a request?
Mr. Chair, I have a very cursory knowledge of our authorities and would need to refer that question to our Chief Financial Officer or perhaps to someone. I'm not sure that Stefan would actually know that question either. So we would need to come back to you to give you a fulsome response.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Ms. Nicholson, have you ever met Mr. Clark?
Mr. Chair, I have never met Mr. Clark.
How did you know that green light was a mischaracterization of Mr. Clark's role?
Mr. Chair, as I stated in my opening remarks, after providing the initial summary that was intended as a very initial overview to the Minister's office on June 17th, we asked our colleagues in the property branch to provide a more fulsome explanation or chronology of events. And in that chronology of events, it was very clear that the head of mission had, very much aware that a process was going on and underway that predated his arrival, was in no way influential. And when I saw that information and realized how things could be interpreted from my initial email, I took the liberty of ensuring that that both the department and the minister's office had the best available information at the time.
And what prompted the request for a more fulsome explanation of events?
Mr. Chair, as evidenced by your article in the National Post, our office was not aware of this transaction, and so our office, while we had the initial conversations with Property Branch to gather the initial information provided in June 17th, there was certainly an acknowledgement that this transaction there was interest within the associate's office of having a more fulsome understanding of that transaction, and as such, the request came from our office to pull together a detailed chronology so that, because Mr. Chair, it's also quite complex. It was spanning over 10 years. It involved numerous decision points, and so for our office to have a clear understanding of what exactly had happened from start to finish, we requested to have that information put forward to us, and once we had it ready, we relayed that to the minister's office. It just happened to be on July 25th.
I looked up the definition of the term green light, and the most common North American definition is to give permission to go ahead with. Now, if Mr. Clark had given permission to go ahead with the purchase, would that have been inappropriate?
Mr. Chair, I would need to relay that that question to that. I would be giving you my notional understanding, which would be probably inaccurate. So I would refer the question to my colleague Stéphane Cousineau, if that would be acceptable.
There's only time for a very brief answer, please.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify the reality of what the consult was approving, which is essentially ensuring that his operation was not impacting, and we wanted to make sure that the plan was fine for his operation, no impact, and he was actually approving the process of proceeding, not the purchase of the actual new residence. Mr. Clark was
I'm afraid
not,
that's all we have time for. Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Nicholson, I join my colleagues in expressing a deep skepticism in regards to the explanation that you have provided this committee today. I want to go back to a response you gave in regards to a question that was asked today. In response to the question about who asked for the update email sent on July 25th, you stated that it was the Office of the Associate that requested it. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, to the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay, and are you the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Associate? Is that the office you are referring to?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So you're telling us that your own office requested you for the update. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for any confusion. It was our office requesting of the leads, my colleagues in the property branch, that they provide the chronology.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a lot of confusion being created here today. In fact, I want to go back to the email that you sent on July 25th, and in that email you state that the reason for this update email was because of a conversation between Minister Jolie's Chief of Staff, Peter Wilkinson, and the Chief of Staff of the Deputy Minister, Carolina Guay. And I'm going to quote what you wrote at the top of your email. Peter, following your conversation with Carolina, and further to my email of June 17th below, I am writing to provide additional information on the purchase of a new official residence for the consulate in New York. I think we may have found the subject expert that you have referenced in your testimony earlier in this meeting in regards to who advised you on what should be in the updated email, and that would appear to be Mr. Wilkinson, in conversation with Carolina Guay. So, and I hope I'm saying her last name right. So I guess I'm going to give you one more opportunity to tell this committee, did anyone in the minister's office, anyone at any level in the minister's office, directly or indirectly ask you to provide an update and to include this information in it?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the email that I provided on June 17th was an initial email to the minister's office.
That's not what I asked. I asked, did anyone in the minister's office ask you directly or indirectly to provide the information that you included in this summary?
Mr. Chair, unequivocally, no. There was no instruction on what to include. We were providing information to the minister's office. The minister's office had asked for what was the rationale and the business case for the sale of the original property purchased in 1961 and asked if the head of mission was aware.
Okay. I do have the email in front of me. When did the conversation between Peter Wilkinson and Carolina Guay take place?
Mr. Chair, with apologies, I don't have that information top of mind. I would need to go back and consult with the individuals in question, as I wasn't in that conversation.
But it certainly would have happened sometime between the June 17th and the email that you sent. And I'm going to assume that it probably took place much closer to the July 25th date than it did to the June 17th date. I want to ask you, Ms. Nicholson, if you will table all communications, emails, written documents, or phone calls between yourself and any member of the Real Property Branch of Global Affairs Canada, Peter Wilkinson, Carolina Guay, and anyone working at the consulate in New York City from June 1st, 2024 to October 3rd, 2024.
Mr. Chair, if that's within the purview of the committee, I'm more than happy to provide whatever the committee needs to do its work.
And I can assure you it absolutely is within the purview of a standing committee to ask a witness to do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett.
Shin, you said you receive information from subject matter experts. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So you insert the information from the subject matter experts. You are not the subject matter expert. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So that means, respectfully, that on the $9 million condo, you are not the expert.
That would be accurate, Mr. Chair.
So you received information from the experts before you sent this email on June the 17th. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, in compiling the information for the June 17th email,
It came from the experts.
That came from our property branch, yes.
So you just testified that you issued a correction to your email, and so the story that you've told today doesn't add up, just like the two emails that you've sent that don't add up. You're saying two contradictory things. That you only receive, that you only report the info that you receive, but on July 25th, you arrived at a conclusion on your own, absent the other information. So if the subject matter experts told you in June that, to use your words, that the head of mission providing the green light for the selection of the new residents, if that's what the experts told you, if you're just air traffic control and you just landed the information in the document, well, where did the new information come from? Mm-hmm. This is what doesn't make sense. Which subject matter expert told you on July 25th, the day after a standing committee of the House of Commons launched an investigation into this $9 million condo, which expert told you that Mr. Clark didn't have anything to do with it? Their name.
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the experts have already been stated. Mr. Robin Dubois, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Property, and his team. And just to clarify that the request for the chronology and the information that was provided in that quite fulsome email was requested. That request had been made.
When? On what date? On what date was the request made for the chronology from the minister's office?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the following the initial information that was provided to the minister's office on June 17th, the Office of the Associate engaged with my colleagues in Property Branch and asked them to pull together the more fulsome explanation.
Ma'am, what date did you get the request?
Mr. Chair, I would have to go back. I don't have a date off the top of my head.
Okay, we're going to need you to table it because it just seems. And do you agree to table that, with the committee?
Of course.
Okay, so it seems incredible. Like, what a coincidence that you get the information from the experts, and then you circulate that in the department, and a correction is issued only after just a happenstance conversation with the minister's office, and suddenly the head of mission is no longer giving the green light. Like that simply does not add up. It's absolutely not believable. And in the absence of proof, of proof of what you're saying, it appears that you're misleading us today. Because we have your own words. We have your own words making the assertion that the green light was given by the head of mission, by Tom Clark, to buy a $9 million condo. After the Treasury Board changed the rules to allow for purchases of less than $10 million without cabinet approval. It's like this perfect puzzle was put together, and the only interruption was a standing committee started an investigation, and suddenly a correction needs to be made. Does that sound believable to you? Does this presentation of facts sound believable to you? What you say on June 17th is one thing, and then of your own volition, without any new information, at the end of July, you say the complete opposite. You assert the complete opposite without evidence that what you're asserting is true.
Mr. Chair, it would be inaccurate to say that there was no new information presented. As I have said from the outset, the email provided on June 17th was very much an initial overview, not intended to capture everything and focus specifically on the sale.
From an overview perspective, you said Tom Clark gave the green light, and you only changed your story after an investigation was launched. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward the motion that I tabled in committee on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024, regarding the Governor General and what was requested of the committee, that the committee take stock of the fact that the Governor General cannot speak well to Francophones in Quebec and elsewhere in provinces in their mother tongue, that it express its deep disappointment that after 3 years since her appointment, the Governor General of Canada is unable to sustain a basic level of conversation in French in the exercise of her title as representative of the sovereign in Canada, and that she has spoken only in English when French is the only official language in the province of Quebec, and requests the chair to report to the House as soon as possible. So this is simply a request to report to the House on the situation, a report on our disappointment. I hope it's not just me who is very disappointed in the face of such a situation. She is the representative of the King of England, and consequently the head of state of Canada. The head of state speaks French. The representative is bilingual, but it's possible to be bilingual in many ways. Could have been with Spanish, Mandarin, Portuguese, could have been Danish, Swedish, but nevertheless, the two official languages of Canada are French and English. It's not one of the 3,000 or so languages or thousands of dialects around the world. So it's about respect for Francophones in Quebec and the rest of Canada, regardless of whether they believe in or support this sign of the monarchy in Canada. They still need and have the right to be respected in their mother tongue. to see that language be considered as important. So I open debate for my colleagues to be able to express themselves and determine the issue around the vote to bring this report to the House of Commons. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest we have an NDP, CPC, and LIB left. So if we proceed with those and then go back to debating that motion, would be much appreciated. So we can finish this round and dismiss our witnesses and then go to the... I do understand that the chair has already asked for extra time, so that shouldn't be an issue. Thank you.
Je n'y vois.
I don't see an issue as long as we come back to this after the round of questions.
Well, if you wish to withdraw for now, we can get back to it. We've got resources to about 1:30. I'm supposed to be in the House at 1:12 to finish a speech. I'm hoping we don't delay this much, but we can continue with the rounds if you're fine and get back to it after. We have we have yourself, Mr. Backrack, and then Conservative and Liberal round, and then we'll resume?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we fine with that, Mrs. Vignola? If committee is fine, we'll do that, and then I'll start a speaking a list when we finish up with the Liberal round. So we will, we've pretty much burned through your 2.5 minutes, so we'll zip over to Mr. Backrack, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to the topic of Mr. Clark and the process for approving the process. Mr. Clark asserted in his testimony that he was aware of the process, but, quote, I was not part of that process. Now, Mr. Cousineau has just said Mr. Clark was approving the process for proceeding. It seems like, to me, and maybe I'll pose this as a question to Ms. Nicholson, is approving a process, does that constitute being part of that process? Like if you're in charge of approving a process in your department, does that not make you a part of that process?
Mr. Chair, I'm hesitant to speak to any hypothetical situations. I can speak to what I approve and to refer specifically to the question in which I'm here today, which is specifically to speak to the 2 emails that I drafted. I drafted these emails, but other than that, in any reference to approval of a process related to property, I would need to refer you to my colleague, Mr. Cousineau.
To your understanding, did Mr. Clark approve the process based on the information that you've seen?
Based on the information that I have seen, my understanding is that the head of mission was aware and did not raise any concerns with the department moving forward to proceed with the sale and then purchase. Again, to clarify...
But not raising... Did he approve the process? Did he approve the process? It's a very simple question. It's like a yes or a no. Did he approve the process?
Mr. Chair, no, the head of mission did not approve it was not in a place to approve the sale or purchase.
Why did Mr. Cousineau say that he approved the process?
Mr. Chair, I would need to refer you to my honorable colleague here who would be able to speak to his words.
Like it seems, Mr. Chair, like there's so much prevarication around Mr. Clark's actual role that it strikes the committee, and I think I can speak for some of my colleagues at least, that there's an attempt to construct a story that is, has any semblance of credibility when, in actual fact, Mr. Clark was fairly involved in the process. Wasn't just aware that a process was happening, but actually had some role in green-lighting the process. In fact, may have been instrumental in the process. And, it's frustrating for me because perhaps I differ a little bit from my Conservative colleagues in the question of whether the purchase of that property was in Canada's best interest, whether it was a good decision. Really, this study has evolved into a study about the actual process and whether people are telling the truth about Mr. Clark's role. And that should be something that people are very concerned about if they're watching this, because we have a set of facts and assertions that is frankly unbelievable. It's unbelievable that a senior civil servant would write a memo and misuse phrases like giving a green light or has been instrumental. So we're in this strange situation where we have testimony that doesn't line up, and where we're forced to make conclusions based on inconsistent testimony provided by Mr. Clark and yourselves today. So I don't have any more questions other than to say it's really disappointing that we haven't been able to get to the bottom of what actually happened, and instead we're stuck making assumptions. So I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.